Hello, everyone. Today we'll be talking about Boethius on divine foreknowledge and its compatibility or lack of compatibility with human freedom. So let us begin. So here's the problem. First, there is the Christian problem of divine predestination, right? The problem of trying to reconciling human freedom with God's willing humans to be good or bad. And that story of divine predestination is grounded in grace. Salvation requires grace. It requires good works in some sense. It requires good works, and that whole process, the process of virtue requires divine assistance. It requires divine grace, and divine grace is something that is freely given by God to humans to allow them to do the right thing, to allow them to grow in virtue, to have good works. Um, and To some extent, that is mainstream Christianity, but the stronger the view it is, the more it kind of confines or limits or does away completely with human freedom. So that's a puzzle in the Christian world to make sense of divine predestination. But kind of a relatively straightforward way out of this puzzle is to say either that grace is actually not required for doing the right thing. Then there's no problem with divine predestination, precisely because there's no divine predestination, or to say something like, well, grace is required, but freedom still plays a role. We are free to accept or not accept the graces that God gives us. So we still have this role, this important role to play, in that itself grounds human freedom and it allows for divine predestination because God knows whether or not we'll accept the grace and so on. But anyway, there are ways of responding to the predestination worry. And if we deny the role of grace that makes it troublesome, we are out of the woods in that regard. There's still another issue or problem that remains, even if you want to hold on to freedom in the face of the potential challenges of divine grace. And that is the problem of divine foreknowledge. And that is reconciling human freedom with God's knowing what humans will do or not do before they do so. So if it seems intrusive into your freedom, that God is willing for you to do something, right? That's actively choosing on your behalf in some sense, or at least part of the story, he's choosing on your behalf. If that feels intrusive, then it is that problem of divine predestination that is bothering you. But if you have a solution to that, say by denying something with the rule of grace, you still have the worry that God already knows what you will do before you do it. And most people in the Christian tradition accept divine foreknowledge. God knows ahead of time. It seems to be grounded in the tradition, it seems to be grounded in the scriptures. It's hard to deny that some people have. Um, but anyway, this is a different problem. It's not about God willing or giving you graces or causally interacting with you. It's just about the fact that God knows what you will do. And some people just see it immediately. Oh, if God knows what I will do, then I'm not free. But let's spell it out a little bit more carefully. So, first, a claim about the nature of human freedom. Human freedom is incompatible with necessity. And a different way of saying the same thing is to say that we are free only if we can do otherwise than we actually do. So suppose, you know, you go to class and it's the end of class, and now you walk out of the building and you're thinking, oh, should I go to my dorm or should I go to the library? You think, well, I still have some time. They go to the library and study for half an hour, right? So you take this course of action. You choose to go. You freely choose to go to the library. Part of what's going on here, we think, is that you could have done differently. You could have said, you know what, I'm just going to go to the dorm and take a break or something. But there were options before you. There were several alternatives open to you, and there was possible for you to choose any of them. And it was your freedom that settled. You were in control of which of those became actual, right? That's what we can hold you responsible if you go to your dorm instead of the library to study, then the professor can give you a bad grade. Well, I guess you chose to use your freedom in such a way that you did not prepare well for an exam and so on. We hold people responsible on the basis of the assumption that they're in control of their actions, and that part of what that control means is that they're free to choose from multiple alternatives. They did something they could have done differently, right? Their actions are not necessary. They have control over multiple possibilities. That seems to be at the heart of freedom. And yet, that also seems to be in tension with divine foreknowledge. And here's the way that Kenny, the author of the book, puts it. The difficulty is this: if God foresees all, foreknows all, and God cannot be in error, God cannot make a mistake, then what he foresees must happen of necessity. For if it is possible for our deeds and desires to turn out in a way other than God foresees them, then it is possible for God to be in error. But of course, an attribute of God is infallibility. God cannot make mistakes. If he believes that you will go to the library, saying the previous example, you will go to the library, right? In fact, it seems to be necessary that if an infallible being believes that after class you will go to the library, then you will go to the library. I mean, that seems to be necessary. Infallibility grants that necessity. That God doesn't only grant that you will go, but it seems that God's infallibility grants that you must go because he cannot be mistaken. So that's the heart of the problem. It seems that freedom is done away with purely on the basis of God's foreknowledge, with no appealing to grace, with no appealing to the predestination. Boethius does not think so. He thinks that there is a solution, there's a way out of this puzzle. And here's the heart of his solution. The first thing is to know that knowledge itself does not cause or undermine what it knows, or the thing that is being known by the knower. And here's an example. Think about sitting versus knowing. Suppose that you are, in my office, and or in office hours, and you're in front of me, and you're sitting in a chair. So here's what happens. You choose to sit down, and on the basis of your choice, I see you sitting down, and I know that you're sitting down. But my knowledge that you're sitting down is not in any way the cause of your sitting down, or in no way does it undermine your sitting down, right? My knowledge is kind of not part of the causal story that gave rise to your sitting down. You can get up at any moment, or you're free to get up. Now, of course, if you get up, freely choose to get up, I immediately notice, right? My knowledge keeps track, and now I know that you're standing, and then you sit again freely. Now I know that you're sitting, right? So my knowledge is constantly keeping track of your actions, at least in that context. But it's crucially that it is your freedom to act that is guiding that correspondence between you do sitting, I know you're sitting, you stand, I know you stand, right? That correlation between my knowledge and your actions is grounded in your freedom. You're the one who's choosing to do things, and my knowledge is just keeping track of that. You're the source of my knowledge. Now, uh, Boethius is going to say that that's pretty much the same story that happens with God. When God knows that you will go to the library after class, he's not causing you, he's not making you do it, he's not making it necessary for you to do so. He's just doing pretty much what I'm doing when you're sitting in my office. Whatever you do, I'm looking at you, so I know that you're sitting, you're standing, and so on. And here's the basic move. Uh, Boethius thinks that God is not in time. God is outside of time, or at least he's atemporal. He's not in time. Rather, God is in eternity, and he describes eternity in the following way. Eternity is the whole and perfect possession all at once of an endless life. It's like your the whole life of a being in one instant, in the eternal now, he calls it at some point. And this picture here it helps you a little bit, right? There is God at the top, and the line going that has the numbers, those are the dates, represents time. And you see the little arrow of time moving forward, right? There's the present, sometime up to 2000. Going in the one direction is the past, going in the other is the future, and the now or the present, moves through the line of time. You and I and everything changeable is represented in this line. And not in the line is God, and God is looking, right? He's looking at all of it. At the same time, one of the arrows is pointing to something that happened in the 1600s, what is happening now, what's happening in the 21st century, and then the 22nd century, 23rd century, and so on. He can look at the whole timeline, the whole eternity, all the way to the past, all the way to the past and all the way to the future. He can see it all at once. Much like I can see whether you sit or stand when you're in my office, except that I can only be looking at you at the now, right? What you do at the now. The way the God does it, he's outside of time, so he can see all of time at the same moment of eternal now. So Boethius will say that there's a sense in which God does not really foresee anything, that God does not foreknow, right? To foreknow is to know ahead of time, before it happens. God doesn't really know anything before it happens. God sees things as they happen when they're actually currently happening. He says things like, what is future to us is itself present to God in the eternal now. So look at the present, right? There's the present, what's happening to us now. If we look forward, say 100 years into the future, there is this other event that happens 100 years from now. And to us, it is future. Why? Because it will take 100 years for the present to get there. But God is outside of time. He's just looking at the whole thing, right? He's just looking at the front or the back of the whole like line of time. He knows at what time things are happening, and he's seen what's will happen in 100 years, but he's seeing it as it's happening, right, at its time. So God is seeing the whole thing at the same time, and it's pretty much like my seeing you sitting there, standing in in my office. My knowledge of what you're doing is not undermining anything you're doing. It's not causing it. It's not depriving your freedom. Why? Because it is your freedom that is guiding. I'm just tracking. That's the same story here. It is the passage of time, as described in the line. It is the free choices of people within time and the causal factors, everything that happens within time, that is driving what occurs as the now passes. But God is just looking at it from above, and He's seeing how things develop. And Aquinas used this cool metaphor. So there's a man in a tower, and the man in the tower can see farther ahead than people below, right? The people below the horizon is slightly different. So in Aquinas' example, and Aquinas has the same view that Boethius does. Um, the man in the tower looks ahead and he sees two rivals, two people that are enemies, and that they're walking in the same road in opposite directions. They're walking towards each other. They're still far enough that they cannot see each other. Maybe there's a hill in between. And but the man in the tower can see that they're approaching each other. The man in the tower knows that they're enemies and that they have promised that when they next time they see each other, they will fight. So the man in the tower can foresee, in some sense of foresee, the fight that will happen in the next few minutes. Not because he's undermining the freedom, like because he's causing or bringing about. He's just, has a more privileged perspective, a more privileged point of view that allows him to see farther than the agents within, the road. And something like that. It is God is has this privileged perspective on time in which He sees the whole thing at once, but we are the ones driving. We're the ones acting within time, and that's where freedom is. And God's looking at it from outside is where His knowledge resides, and everything works out. God's knowledge is not an obstacle any more than the knowledge that I have when you're in my office, whether you're sitting or standing, is an obstacle to your freedom. In other words, it's not an obstacle at all. So that is Boethius' solution. Does it work? Is it a good solution? That's extremely controversial. Some people, a lot of people say, well, obviously, like this is it, like this, we're done. Let's find a solution. God's eternity. A lot of other people say, well, wait a minute, that's just more mysterious than not. And then there are some objections. For us, let's just put the solution forth and leave it at that. I'll see you next time.